November 1256. The Mongol war machine has never been stopped. Not by the great cities of Persia, not by the armies of China, not by the cavalry of the steppes. But here, in the mountains of northern Iran, Hülegü Khan, grandson of Genghis himself, has brought his entire siege train to destroy one castle, not a capital, not a kingdom, a single fortress called Maymun Diz. And his own commanders are telling him to turn back. Because the men inside, they're the assassins, and their mountain fortresses have never fallen. What happens next will change the Middle East forever. But before we get to the siege, you need to understand something. Something that explains why the most powerful military force on Earth is hesitating at the foot of a mountain. The men inside that fortress, they're not ordinary defenders. They are the Nizari Ismailis. The West calls them the assassins. And for nearly 2 centuries, they have been the most feared organization in the Islamic world. Not because of their armies. They don't have armies. Not because of their wealth. They don't control trade routes or fertile plains. Their power comes from something far more terrifying. They kill kings, sultans, viziers, generals, caliphs. Anyone who moves against them dies, not on a battlefield, but in their own throne room, in their own bed, surrounded by their own guards. The assassins don't fight wars. They end them before they start. One knife, one throat. Message received. For generations, the greatest powers in the Middle East have learned a simple lesson. Leave the Nizari alone. But here's what makes them truly impossible to destroy. Their castles. Scattered across the mountains of Persia and Syria, the Nizari have built a network of fortresses that defies military logic. We're not talking about walls on flat ground. We're talking about citadels carved into cliff faces, strongholds perched on peaks so high that armies can't even reach the gates. Alamut, Lamasar, Girdku, Maymun Diz. These aren't just defensive positions. They're architectural impossibilities. Deep cisterns cut into solid rock, holding enough water to last years. Storerooms packed with grain that could feed garrisons through decade-long sieges. Walls that don't need to be thick, because the mountain itself is the wall. You want to starve them out? They'll outlast you. You want to storm the walls? You'll climb 1,000 feet under arrow fire just to reach them. You want to use siege engines? Good luck dragging a trebuchet up a mountain path that barely fits a donkey. For 200 years, every power that tried to break the assassins failed. The Seljuk Turks tried. They controlled an empire stretching from Afghanistan to the Mediterranean. They sent army after army into those mountains. Every single one came back broken. Or didn't come back at all. The Khwarezmian Empire tried. At the height of their power, they ruled Persia, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. They couldn't crack a single Nizari fortress. Even the great Saladin, the man who took Jerusalem from the Crusaders, tried to destroy the assassins. He failed too. Actually, that story is worth telling, because it shows you exactly what kind of enemy we're dealing with. In 1176, Saladin was at the height of his power. He decided enough was enough. The assassins had killed too many of his allies, threatened too many of his plans. He marched his army into the Nizari mountains to end them once and for all. He besieged their fortress. He burned their crops. He was settling in for a long campaign. And then one morning, Saladin woke up to find a poisoned dagger on his pillow. Next to it, a note. The message was simple. We can reach you anywhere, anytime. Call off your army, or the next dagger won't be left as a warning. Saladin, the greatest Muslim general of his age, packed up his army and went home. He never moved against the assassins again. That's who the Mongols are facing. An enemy that doesn't need to beat you in battle. An enemy that just needs to wait you out. An enemy that can kill your leader and watch your army fall apart. So why is Hülegü here? Why is the grandson of Genghis Khan risking his entire campaign on this one fortress? Because the Mongols aren't like other conquerors. The Mongols don't negotiate. They don't accept stalemates. They don't leave enemies alive behind them. When Genghis Khan built his empire, he established a rule that his descendants followed without exception. Submit completely or be erased completely. There is no middle ground. The Nizari Ismailis have existed outside this system for too long. They've sent ambassadors offering partial submission. They've promised tribute. They've suggested arrangements. The Mongols don't make arrangements. In 1253, the great Khan Mongol, ruler of the largest empire the world has ever seen, gave his brother Hülegü a mission. Not a suggestion. Not a request. A mission. Destroy the assassins, every fortress, every leader, every trace of their power. Then move on to Baghdad and destroy the Abbasid Caliphate. Then keep going until you reach Egypt. This is the Mongol way. Total conquest. Absolute submission. And Hülegü has been given an army to match the ambition. We're talking about a force that defies comprehension. Estimates vary, but Hülegü's army likely numbers somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 men. Some sources go higher. This isn't just cavalry, though Mongol cavalry alone would be enough to crush most kingdoms. This is a complete military machine. Engineers from China who have perfected siege warfare over centuries of conflict. Siege engines that can hurl projectiles weighing hundreds of pounds. Specialists in incendiary weapons. Naphtha, burning pitch, things that stick to stone and keep burning. The Mongols have learned from every civilization they've conquered. They've taken the best military technology from China, from Persia, from every corner of Asia, and combined it into something unprecedented. This army has already destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, the same empire that couldn't take a single assassin castle. They did it in 3 years. Cities that had stood for centuries were erased from existence. Populations that numbered in the hundreds of thousands were massacred down to the last child. The Mongols don't just defeat enemies, they eliminate them. And now this overwhelming force is moving into the Nizari Mountains. But here's the problem. The mountains don't care how big your army is. Hülegü Khan is standing at the edge of an impossible situation. It's late 1256. His army, the largest invasion force the Middle East has ever seen, is spread across the mountain valleys of northern Persia. And his commanders are looking at the terrain ahead with something that Mongol officers rarely show: doubt. The Nizari fortress network isn't one castle. It's dozens, scattered across hundreds of miles of some of the most brutal terrain on Earth. Peaks that touch the clouds, valleys so deep that sunlight barely reaches the bottom, passes so narrow that an army has to move single file. And every single fortress is designed for one purpose: to make sieges last forever. Hülegü's generals have done the math, and the math is terrifying. If they attack each castle in sequence, starting with the strongest, they could be stuck in these mountains for years, maybe decades. Every fortress they besiege is a fortress that drains their supplies, exhausts their men, and gives the other castles time to prepare. Winter is coming. In these mountains, winter doesn't just slow campaigns, it kills them. Snow closes the passes, supply lines freeze, horses starve, men freeze to death in their sleep. The Mongols have conquered most of the known world, but they've never faced anything like this. This is where Hülegü proves why the Mongols chose him to lead this campaign. He doesn't think like a traditional general. He thinks like a Mongol. And the Mongol way isn't about brute force. It's about finding the one point where force matters most. His strategists identify the weakness in the Nizari network. And it's not a wall. It's not a gate. It's a man. Rukn al-Din Kurshah, the young imam of the Nizari Ismailis. the spiritual leader of the entire assassin network, the one person whose word can command every fortress, every garrison, every hidden blade in the organization. And right now, he's not at Alamut, the legendary fortress that everyone knows, the symbolic heart of assassin power. He's at Maymun Diz, a smaller fortress, still formidable. We're still talking about a citadel on a mountain peak with walls that have never been breached. But smaller than Alamut, less famous, less reinforced, and infinitely more valuable. Because if Hülegü can take Maymun Diz, he doesn't just capture a castle, he captures the Imam himself. And if he has the Imam, he has everything. One man's voice can open every gate in the network. One man's command can end a siege before it starts. The Nizari fortresses aren't held together by walls. They're held together by faith, by loyalty to the Imam. Capture the shepherd, and the flock will follow. This is the Mongol genius. They don't see castles. They see systems. And every system has a single point of failure. Hülegü gives the order. Forget the other fortresses. Forget Alamut. Everything, every soldier, every siege engine, every resource converges on Maymun Diz. But there's a problem. Imam Kursha knows exactly what Hülegü is planning, and he's not stupid. The negotiations begin in autumn 1256, and they are a masterclass in delay. Kursha sends envoys to the Mongol camp, respectful, diplomatic, offering exactly what the Mongols want to hear: submission, tribute, cooperation. But not quite yet. The Imam explains that he needs time to consult with his commanders, time to prepare his people for this transition, time to dismantle some of the fortifications as a gesture of good. Faith. He even starts doing it. Some outer walls come down, some defensive positions are abandoned. See? Progress. Good faith. Just a little more time. Hülegü watches this performance with cold eyes. He's seen this game before. Every enemy of the Mongols plays it. Delay, stall, promise, hope that something changes, that winter comes, that reinforcements arrive, that the Mongols get distracted by another war somewhere else. The Imam is buying time. Every day that passes without a siege is a day closer to winter, a day closer to snow closing the passes, a day closer to the Mongol supply lines stretching to the breaking point. And if Hülegü has to withdraw for winter, the spell breaks, the myth of Mongol inevitability shatters. Every fortress in the network sees that resistance is possible. The campaign that should have taken months could take years. Hülegü sends back a simple message: total surrender. Now, not partial, not gradual. Complete submission of every fortress, starting with Maymun Diz. The Imam will come down from his mountain and prostrate himself before the Khan. Every wall will be opened. Every garrison will disarm. Anything less is unacceptable. Kursha responds with more delays, more promises, more negotiations. He's playing for time, and he's playing well. The man is young, only in his 20s, but he's been raised in a tradition of survival. The Nizari have outlasted greater empires than the Mongols. They've survived through patience, through cunning, through the simple mathematics of siege warfare. Every day is a victory, every week is a triumph. Hold until winter, and everything changes. But Kursha has miscalculated something. He's thinking like a defender, like someone who wins by not losing. Hülegü isn't thinking like an attacker. He's thinking like a force of nature. On November 8th, 1256, the negotiations end. Not with a diplomatic breakthrough, not with a compromise, with the sound of 100,000 soldiers moving into position. The siege of Maymun Diz has begun, and the defenders are about to learn something that no one in these mountains has ever experienced: what it feels like when the Mongols stop talking. Picture the scene. Maymun Diz sits on a mountain peak, its walls rising from the living rock like they grew there. Below, the slopes fall away in every direction, steep, treacherous, designed by nature and improved by 2 centuries of engineering to be unclimbable. The Nizari garrison watches from above. They've seen armies before. They've seen sieges before. Their fathers and grandfathers held these walls against the greatest powers of their age. They are not afraid. And then they see what's coming up the mountain paths. Siege engines, not the crude catapults that other armies drag to castle walls. These are precision instruments of destruction, built by Chinese engineers who have been perfecting siege warfare for 1,000 years. Mangonels that can hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds with terrifying accuracy. Trebuchets that can reach heights that should be impossible. And behind the siege engines, men. An endless stream of men pouring into the valleys below like water filling a basin, setting up camps that stretch to the horizon, building fortifications of their own, not to defend against sallies, but to ensure that nothing gets out. The encirclement is complete within days. Maymun Diz is cut off from the world. No messengers in, no messengers out, no reinforcements, no supplies, no hope of rescue. The Nizari have always relied on their ability to wait, to endure, to outlast. But you can't outlast something that isn't going to stop. November 9th. The bombardment begins. The sound is like nothing the defenders have ever heard. Stone striking stone. Walls that have stood for generations shuddering under impacts that shouldn't be possible. The Mongol engineers have done something extraordinary. They've hauled siege equipment up mountain paths that should have been impassable. They've positioned mangonels on slopes that barely have room to stand. They've turned the terrain, the Nizari's greatest advantage, into a shooting gallery. And they don't stop. Day and night. Night and day. The bombardment continues without pause. The Mongols work in shifts, fresh crews rotating in as exhausted ones rotate out. The defenders don't get that luxury. Every man is needed on the walls. Every moment is a crisis. November 10th, November 11th, November 12th. The walls begin to crack. November 13th, 1256. The walls of Maymun Diz are bleeding. 5 days of continuous bombardment. 5 days of stones the size of cattle slamming into fortifications that were supposed to last forever. 5 days of sleepless terror for the defenders, who can't even repair the damage because the bombardment never stops. But here's the thing about the Nizari. They don't break easy. These aren't conscript soldiers fighting for a paycheck. These are true believers, men who have sworn their lives to the Imam. Men who have been taught since childhood that their fortress is sacred, that their cause is holy, that death in defense of the faith is the highest honor. The walls are cracking, but the men behind them are not. And Hülegü knows it. He's watching from his command position below the fortress, and he sees something that worries him. The bombardment is working. The physical damage is mounting every hour. But bombardment alone won't take this castle. At some point, his men will have to climb those slopes, storm those walls, fight the defenders hand to hand. And that's where things get complicated. Because assault isn't like bombardment. Assault means sending men up a mountainside against enemies who have every advantage, enemies who are defending their homes, their faith, their imam, enemies who have nowhere to retreat and nothing to lose. The Mongols have won 100 sieges, but they've also learned a brutal lesson. Even victory can cost too much. Lose too many men taking one fortress, and you don't have enough left to take the next. Hülegü gives the order anyway. November 15th, the first assault. Mongol soldiers begin climbing the slopes toward Maymun Diz. Not a probe, not a feint. A full assault, with thousands of men streaming up the mountainside toward the breaches in the walls. From above, the Nizari defenders unleash everything they have. Arrows, rocks, boiling liquids, anything that can be thrown, dropped, or hurled at the men struggling up the slopes. The mountainside becomes a killing ground, Men fall screaming, others take their place. The Mongol advance pushes forward through a rain of death. They reach the walls. Fighting erupts in the breaches, hand to hand, blade to blade. The Mongol soldiers are among the finest warriors on earth, hardened by a lifetime of conquest, trained in techniques perfected over generations. But the defenders have the high ground, the desperation of cornered men, and the unshakable conviction that they are fighting for something greater than survival. The assault fails. The Mongols are pushed back, thrown down the slopes, forced to retreat, leaving their dead scattered across the mountainside. This is the moment, right here. This is where every other siege of the assassin fortresses ended. This is where the Seljuks turned back, where the Khwarezmians gave up, where Saladin decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The defenders of Maymun Diz have proven what generations of Nizari have proven before them. Their castles are unbreakable. But Hülegü isn't like the others. He doesn't retreat. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't reconsider. He escalates. November 16th. The siege enters a new phase. The Mongol engineers have been working through the night, not repairing their siege engines, improving them, heavier counterweights, larger ammunition, and something new: fire. The Chinese engineers in Hülegü's army have brought technologies that the Islamic world has never seen. Incendiary compounds that burn hotter than natural fire, substances that stick to stone and keep burning even when you try to smother them, naphtha-based weapons that turn defensive positions into furnaces. The bombardment resumes. But now the stones aren't just stones. Now they're wrapped in burning pitch. Now they're filled with compounds that explode into flame on impact. Now every projectile that clears the walls doesn't just damage the fortress, it sets it on fire. The defenders scramble to contain the blazes. But how do you fight fires when you're also fighting a siege? How do you haul water when the bombardment never stops? How do you repair walls while everything around you is burning? November 17th. The fires are spreading. Storerooms that held supplies for years-long sieges are going up in smoke. The deep cisterns that made the fortress self-sufficient are being contaminated with ash and debris. The carefully engineered systems that were supposed to guarantee survival are failing one by one. And outside the walls, fresh Mongol troops are massing for another assault. The defenders look down at the army below them. Then they look at their burning fortress. Then they look at each other. For 200 years, no one has broken an assassin's stronghold by force. But no one has ever tried like this. Imam Khursha is facing an impossible decision. He's young, barely 25 years old. He inherited leadership of the Nizari just 2 years ago, when his father died. He was supposed to have decades to grow into this role. Decades to learn the delicate art of Nizari survival. Instead, he got the Mongols. From his position in the fortress, he can see everything. The burning buildings, the crumbling walls, the exhausted defenders, and below, the endless Mongol army, patient and implacable, waiting for the end. His advisors are divided. Some urge continued resistance. The walls haven't fallen yet. The garrison still holds. Winter is coming. If they can hold a few more weeks, maybe the snows will force a Mongol withdrawal. Maybe salvation is just days away. Others point to the reality. The fortress is dying. The fires can't be contained. Another assault is coming, and this time the defenders won't have walls to hide behind. They'll be fighting in rubble, surrounded by flames, against fresh troops with overwhelming numbers. Hold, and everyone dies. Surrender, and maybe, just maybe, some survive. But surrender means more than opening the gates. Surrender means the Imam himself becoming a prisoner. It means ordering every other fortress in the network to lay down arms. It means the end of everything the Nizari have built. 2 centuries of defiance. 2 centuries of independence. 2 centuries of being the one power in the Middle East that answered to no one. All of it gone, because of 11 days. Kershaw looks at the fires consuming his fortress. He listens to the screams of wounded men. He feels the walls shake with each impact from below. And he makes his choice. November 19th, 1256. A white flag rises above the walls of Maymun Diz. The bombardment stops. The silence is almost more shocking than the noise. After 11 days of constant thunder, the sudden quiet feels like the world holding its breath. Imam Rukn al-Din Khursha descends from his fortress. He walks down the mountain path that his ancestors designed to be unclimbable, past the siege engines that tore his walls apart, through the ranks of Mongol soldiers who watch in silence. He prostrates himself before Hülegü Khan. The assassins have surrendered. But Hülegü isn't finished. Not even close. The fall of Maymun Diz isn't the end of the campaign. It's the beginning of the end. Because now Hülegü has something more powerful than any siege engine. He has the Imam's voice, and he's about to use it to destroy everything. The Imam is a prisoner now, but he's a useful prisoner. Hülegü understands something that other conquerors have missed. The Nizari fortresses aren't held together by walls or soldiers or strategic positions. They're held together by faith, by absolute loyalty to the Imam, by a religious devotion so total that every garrison commander would die before betraying it. Which means every garrison commander will surrender if the Imam tells them to. The ink on Kershaw's surrender is barely dry before Hülegü puts him to work. Letters. Dozens of letters. Hundreds of letters. Each one written in the Imam's own hand, bearing his personal seal, carrying his explicit command. Open your gates. Lay down your weapons. Submit to the Mongols. The letters go out to every fortress in the network. Alamut, Lamasar, Girdku, castles that have never fallen. Castles that were built to resist exactly this kind of conquest. Castles whose commanders have spent their entire lives preparing for the siege that would never come. And one by one, they receive a letter from their spiritual leader telling them to give up without a fight. What do? You've trained your whole life for this moment. You've maintained these walls, stockpiled these supplies, drilled these men, all for the day when the enemy finally comes. Your fortress is strong. Your garrison is loyal. Your supplies could last for years. And then a letter arrives telling you that none of it matters, that the Imam himself has surrendered, that resistance isn't just futile, it's forbidden. Do you obey? Do you betray everything you've prepared for? Or do you refuse? Do you keep fighting, knowing that you're defying the very leader you swore to serve? For most commanders, the choice is agonizing. But the answer is inevitable. They obey. Alamut falls within a week. Let that sink in. Alamut, the legendary fortress, the Eagle's Nest, the birthplace of the assassin movement, where Hassani Sabah himself established the order 2 centuries ago, the most famous, most feared, most symbolically powerful castle in the entire Islamic world. The Mongols take it without a major fight. The garrison receives the Imam's letter. They look at their impregnable walls, their full storerooms, their unbroken defenses. They look at each other, and they open the gates. Hülegü's soldiers pour into a fortress that could have held out for years. They find everything intact, the arsenals, the libraries, the treasuries. 200 years of accumulated power, knowledge, and wealth, handed over without a struggle. The Mongols don't preserve it. The libraries of Alamut are legendary. Generations of Nizari scholars have collected texts on philosophy, science, theology, astronomy, manuscripts that exist nowhere else in the world, knowledge that took centuries to accumulate. The Mongols burn it all, not out of ignorance, not by accident, by policy. The Mongol way is erasure. You don't just defeat an enemy, You erase them. You destroy their cities, their temples, their books, their memory. You make it so that future generations won't even know they existed. The flames at Alamut burn for days, and still the cascade continues. Fortress after fortress receives the Imam's letters. Fortress after fortress opens its gates. The network that took 2 centuries to build is collapsing in weeks. The Mongols move through the mountains like a plague. Every castle they take, they demolish. Every garrison they capture, they slaughter. The men who surrendered peacefully are executed anyway. Hülegü has no use for soldiers whose loyalty was already proven breakable. The women and children? Some are enslaved, some are killed. The historical records are vague on the details, which usually means the details are too horrible to record. This is what Mongol conquest looks like. Not just military victory, civilizational erasure. The Nizari Ismailis aren't just being defeated, they're being deleted from history. And at the center of it all, Imam Kursha keeps writing letters. He has no choice. As long as he cooperates, he lives. As long as he lives, he hopes. Maybe if he's useful enough, the Mongols will spare him. Maybe if he helps them enough, they'll let him keep some fragment of his power, some remnant of his people. He is wrong. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because not everyone obeys, Kursha's letters reach every corner of the Nizari network. His commands are explicit. His authority is unquestionable. Every fortress should surrender. Most do, but not all. Lamasar receives the letter. The commander reads the Imam's words, sees the Imam's seal, understands exactly what is being asked. He refuses. The gates stay closed. The garrison stays armed. When Mongol envoys arrive demanding entry, they're turned away. When Mongol soldiers try to approach the walls, they're met with arrows. Lamasar will fight. It takes the Mongols a year to break it, a full year of siege warfare, of bombardment, of assaults, of starvation. A year in which Hülegü's campaign timeline gets pushed back, his resources get drained, his momentum gets interrupted. One castle, one commander who said no, 1 year of defiance. And then there's Girdku. Girdku is different. Girdku is something special. The fortress sits on a peak so inaccessible that the Mongols can barely even approach it. The garrison is small but fanatically determined. They receive the Imam's letters. They ignore them. For 17 years. Let me say that again. 17 years. Nearly 2 decades after the fall of Maymun Diz, after the execution of the Imam, after the destruction of Alamut, after the Mongol conquest has moved on to Baghdad and beyond, Girdku is still holding out. The garrison shrinks year by year. Supplies run low. The outside world moves on. Empires rise and fall. The Mongol conquest transforms the entire Middle East, and on that lonely peak, a handful of Nizari defenders keep the flag flying. They finally surrender in 1270. Not because they're defeated, because there's simply no one left to fight. The last defenders are too few, too old, too starved to continue. 17 years, 1 castle, against the greatest military power on earth. Think about what that means. The Mongol siege of Maymun Diz lasted 11 days. 11 days, and Hülegü captured the Imam, triggered the cascade collapse, and effectively destroyed the assassin network. But what if it had lasted longer? What if Kursha had held out like the commanders of Lamasar and Girdku? What if he'd refused to surrender, refused to write those letters, refused to give Hülegü the weapon that made the rest of the conquest possible? The math changes completely. Hülegü can't besiege every fortress simultaneously. He has to take them one at a time. And if each fortress fights like Lamasar, if each siege takes a year instead of a week, then the campaign doesn't last months. It lasts decades. Winter comes. The Mongol army can't stay in the mountains forever. Supply lines stretch and break. Reinforcements are needed elsewhere. The great Khan in Mongolia starts asking why his brother is stuck in Persia instead of conquering Baghdad. Every day that Maymun Diz held was a day that changed the calculation. Every day was a day that Hülegü's impossible timeline got more impossible. Let's talk about what happens next. Because the fall of the assassins isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something worse. With the Nizari network destroyed, Hülegü's army is free. Free to move on to the next target. Free to continue the campaign that the great Khan assigned him 3 years ago. Baghdad, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, the jewel of the Islamic world, the city that has stood as the center of Muslim civilization for 500 years. In February 1258, just over a year after the fall of Maymun Diz, Hülegü's army reaches the walls of Baghdad. What follows is one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. The siege lasts less than 2 weeks. The Mongols breach the walls, pour into the city, and begin a massacre that defies comprehension. For 7 days they kill without pause, without mercy, without distinction. The estimates are horrifying. 200,000 dead. Some sources say 500,000. Some say 1 million. The Tigris River runs black with ink from the libraries that are thrown into the water. Then it runs red with blood. The Caliph himself, the spiritual leader of Sunni Islam, the successor to the Prophet's authority, is captured. The Mongols roll him in a carpet and trample him to death with horses. They don't want to shed royal blood directly. Even Mongol brutality has its etiquette. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library in the world, containing centuries of accumulated knowledge in science, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, is destroyed. Manuscripts that existed nowhere else are lost forever. Scholars estimate that human knowledge was set back by centuries. Baghdad never recovers. Not really. The city that was once the intellectual and cultural capital of the world becomes a provincial backwater. It will take 700 years before its population reaches pre-Mongol levels again. And all of this, every death, every burned book, every destroyed mosque, flows from one decision. The decision at Maymun Diz. Think about the timeline. November 1256. Maymun Diz falls after 11 days. December 1256. Alamut surrenders without a fight. Early 1257. The assassin network collapses as fortress after fortress opens its gates. February 1258. Baghdad is destroyed. 15 months. That's all it takes. From the surrender of one castle to the destruction of the greatest city in the Islamic world. If Maymun Diz holds for a year, like Lamasar does, that timeline shatters. If Maymun Diz holds for 2 years, Hülegü is still stuck in the mountains when the great Khan Mongol dies in 1259. And when Mongol dies, everything changes. The Mongol Empire fractures into civil war. Hülegü has to withdraw troops to deal with succession disputes. The unstoppable momentum of the Western campaign breaks. Baghdad might survive. The Caliphate might endure. The entire history of the Middle East might be different, all because of one castle, one 11-day siege, one young imam who chose surrender over death. Was Kershaw wrong? It's easy to judge him from 8 centuries away. Easy to say he should have held out longer, should have accepted martyrdom, should have trusted that his fortress could outlast the Mongol siege. But put yourself in his position. You're 25 years old. You've been the leader of your people for 2 years. You've inherited a network of fortresses that has survived for 2 centuries. But you've also inherited the responsibility for every man, woman, and child inside those fortresses. Your walls are burning. Your men are dying. Your supplies are running out. And outside your gates is an army that has already destroyed every civilization it has ever faced. You can hold out and die. Maybe you buy a few more weeks. Maybe you buy a few more months. But eventually, the walls fall. Eventually, the Mongols pour in. And then everyone dies. Not just you, but everyone who trusted you to protect them. Or you can surrender. You can hope that cooperation buys mercy. You can tell yourself that if you're alive, there's still a chance, still a possibility of survival, of rebuilding, of something beyond the fire and the sword. Kersha chose surrender. He chose hope over certainty, life over death. The Mongols executed him anyway. About a year after his surrender, once he had served his purpose, once every fortress had fallen, once his letters had done their work, they killed him. The sources disagree on how. Some say he was beaten to death. Some say he was simply cut down on the road. The details don't matter. The Mongols always planned to kill him. His cooperation only delayed the inevitable. But here's the tragedy. The commanders who refused to surrender, who held out against impossible odds, who defied the imam's own orders, they were right. Lamasar held for a year and proved that resistance was possible. Gerdku held for 17 years and proved that the Mongols weren't invincible. If every fortress had fought like they did, the assassin network might have survived, battered, diminished, but alive. Instead, Kersha's letters turned surrender into a cascade. His voice, meant to save his people, became the weapon that destroyed them. November 1256, 11 days. That's all it took to erase 2 centuries of history, to destroy a network that had defied every power in the Middle East, to set in motion events that would reshape the world. The Mongol war machine came to the mountains of Persia, expecting a campaign that could last years. They found a young leader who wasn't ready for the weight of his choices. They found walls that could be broken by fire. They found a faith that could be turned against itself. And they found the key to Baghdad. Maymun Diz isn't a famous siege. It doesn't have the drama of Masada or the mythology of Troy. Most people have never heard of it. But it should be remembered, because it shows how fragile everything is, how empires that seem unbreakable can shatter in days, how decisions made under impossible pressure can echo for centuries, how the fate of civilizations can hang on the choice of one person in one moment facing one impossible question: hold or surrender, fight or submit, die with certainty or live with hope. Kersha chose hope, and the Mongols used his hope to burn the world. The Nizari Ismailis still exist today. They survived, not as a military power, but as a religious community. Their current leader, the Aga Khan, is a direct descendant of the Imams, who once commanded the assassin fortresses. The mountains of northern Iran still hold the ruins of their castles. Alamut is a tourist destination now. Visitors climb the same paths that Mongol soldiers climbed 8 centuries ago. They stand on walls that once held against the greatest powers of their age. And somewhere in those ruins, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the echo of a question that has no right answer. What would you have done? 11 days, 1 castle, and an empire's fate hanging in the balance. Now you know what happened. The question is whether it had to happen that way.